Well, good morning. Welcome to Forest Hill Waxhaw. We're so glad you're here this morning. My name is Gardner, and I am the associate campus pastor here at our Waxhaw campus. So I have the privilege of being able to give a message and share with you all this morning. So I hope you're all recovering from Christmas and being with family, and I don't know how much recovery time that means for you. For us, I don't feel like I can share publicly, but it's been a good Christmas season, and I hope it has been for you as well. For those of you who don't know me, I'll give you a little background. I've been here for a little over 2 years now. I started working with student ministry here on staff, and just recently I've transitioned into this role now. I have a beautiful wife named Jen, who's sitting right down front. We have a little girl named Charlotte, who, if you don't know her by face or name, you would know her as the little girl who thinks she owns the atrium on Sunday mornings. She runs back and forth pretty much the entire time. She's 2.5. She's a lot of fun. And we actually have another little girl on the way, so set to be born the first week of February. So we are excited and terrified about that. So this is Charlotte. And the first picture on the left, that's Charlotte when she was a little bit younger. And from day one, when Charlotte was able to move around, kind of do her own thing, she loved playing dress up, right? I mean, mommy and daddy's clothes, daddy's hat, mommy's sunglasses, mommy's shirt. She loves playing dress up. She loves getting all these different things on and checking herself out in the mirror. The picture in her Belle princess dress was taken just yesterday while I was watching my Clemson Tigers win and make their way to another national championship. She was playing dress up with princesses, and I got to say, when I found out we were having a girl, and then this whole process happened again when I found out we were having another girl, my whole idea of what parenting was going to be like changed drastically. Because I think in the back of my mind, I always just assumed I would be raising boys. And I kind of knew what to do with that, right? And it was going to be, in my mind, it's a tougher love, I felt like. It was going to be more of, I have the sports background. It's going to be kind of that, loving coach. I want to help them become a man. And then when I found out I was having a girl, I quickly realized that's not going to work the same way. And I now know more about Disney princesses in 2.5 years of Charlotte's life than I ever wished I would have to know. I know their songs pretty much by heart. I know how they look. I know how they dress now because it's my job at times to dress our little princess when she wants to dress up like Belle, or when we have to figure out the little separate. She had a whole trunk of princess dresses given to her for Christmas, which is a lot of fun. So it's been amazing, but I had to switch because girls especially, we're just going to acknowledge together, I think girls and boys are different. They're a little bit different. And I think there's nature and nurture, all that stuff plays into it, but girls and boys are just different. And one thing that I love about my little girl, though, is this dress up. Anytime she's in front of a mirror, she lights up. She, from the earliest age, you put her face in front of a mirror and she'd kind of smile. She kind of check herself out. When we play videos back of cute things that she's done, she always is quick to climb up on the couch and try to see herself, right? And I think there's something true about this in the fact that we don't have to be taught to enjoy looking at ourselves. We don't have to be taught to enjoy seeing ourselves in a mirror. We don't have to be taught to be concerned about our image. And I think there's a spiritual truth when we come into this time of the year, especially because I think if we really looked at the list of New Year's resolutions, the different things that we're concerned about at this time of the year, I saw an article recently. So the most common one this year is saving money. People want to save money. Maybe that's true for some of you, or maybe it's losing weight, getting more fit, whatever it might be, being a kinder person, starting good habits, stopping bad habits. And if we really got down to the bottom of all of the different things we want to do, even really good things, I think fundamentally there's probably wrapped up in there a concern about how we look, about our image. Maybe it's the physical appearance, but maybe also it's just our reputation. Maybe it's how we look to ourselves, how we feel about ourselves. I think it plays nicely into the cultural idea that image is everything. Y'all have heard that phrase before, right? Image is everything. And this morning what I want to do is I want to talk about this idea that image is everything. And I think if we can get this idea settled in our hearts and minds as we start the new year, we will be in much better shape to actually make some progress towards the things that we want to do. And when we go to God's word, I think we need to set up what culture says image is everything, but what does God say about it? What does God say? And maybe the surprising truth for you this morning is hearing the reality that God thinks image is everything too. God thinks image is everything too. And so I'll set this up. I want to prove it to you because some of you think I'm a heretic at this point. And if we go to the first chapter of the Bible in Genesis chapter 1, I'll set this context up for you a little bit. If you're familiar with the Bible at all, Genesis chapter 1, this is probably Moses. We don't really know who wrote Genesis and Exodus, but we know they're probably written together. Exodus was probably written first. It's explaining the way God's people came out of slavery in Egypt. We ascribe it to Moses. We think that what's basically happening is Genesis was written and Exodus were written as in an inspired way. God is inspiring the scripture, truth-telling to Moses to give the people of Israel an origin story. So any of you guys like comic books or any of the Marvel stuff, anything like that? I am very, I know nothing, so don't talk to me about this after, but it's just the point. If you know any of those movies, you know that they like to do origin stories for some of the characters. So my favorite, Spider-Man. If you have Spider-Man, Spider-Man's origin story is he gets bit by a spider, like he's Peter Parker, right? Is that right? That's his name? Okay. See, I should have studied this beforehand. But he is this other person, then you find out how he became Spider-Man, right? It's an origin story. So Moses or whoever is basically doing the same thing in Genesis and Exodus. He's giving the origin story of the people of God. And he's going back even further in chapters 1 and 2, and he's explaining how everything came into being. Now, some of you are here this morning, and you hear that we're going to talk about Genesis 1 and 2, and it talks about creation. And for you, you automatically turn that off because maybe you're a little more skeptical, maybe you're here and you're kind of seeking, and that it doesn't line up with your worldview of things. And the important thing I want you to hear this morning is not to turn this off because Genesis is much more concerned with who created, not how it was created. Okay, so the point that we want to see here is who created and why, not how it was created. All right, so God inspires this message through Moses. He gives them this order of creation. It's this beautiful song of how God created the world and why, what he was doing. And then this is what happens at the end of chapter 1. At this point, God has created the heavens and the earth. He's created the night and the day. He's created the land and the sea. He's created the animals and the plants. And now the pinnacle of his creation. This is what he says. Then God said, "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and over the livestock, and over the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth." So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. Now, there's a couple important things to see here in this idea of being created in the image of God. Now, most people, when we hear this phrase, image of God or imago Dei, this big theological idea, maybe you've heard it before, maybe you haven't, but it's this really important idea that humans were created differently than everything else that God created. And some people have different ideas about what this actually means. Some people would say, well, it means, we're different from animals. We have consciousness, and we could think we're more self-aware. We can have a relationship with God, these different things. They could say the difference in the imago Dei, the image of God, means we have souls. And all of these things are true. But what many Old Testament scholars are beginning to say now is when we look at some of the other literature coming out of the ancient Near East, it seems more likely that this idea of the image of God has to do with a role and a purpose. A role and a purpose. So when God says he is making humans in his image, that means he is setting us apart with a different role and purpose on this earth. Okay, so if you are a human, raise your hand. Okay, those of you who are not raising your hands, I'm a little concerned at this point, but we'll just save that for later. Everyone in this room is a human. Everyone who is here, you are a living, breathing human. And I have good news for you. If you are here and you are a living, breathing human, that means that you have a specific God-ordained purpose for your life. You have purpose and meaning in your life. If you are here, you're human, and you are breathing, you have purpose. Now that's important because I know in a room of this size, not everyone feels that way this morning. People coming out of the holidays especially, it's easy to feel like you don't have purpose, your life is meaningless. Maybe some people are excited about the new year, but maybe you're dreading it because you have to go back to that boring, meaningless job that you go to. And you just kind of put it back on yourself of, this has no meaning. I want to get out of it. I don't have the relationships that I want. The marriage that I have isn't great. Or maybe I'm single and I want to get married. And you feel like you're just piling on the sense of, I don't have purpose, I don't have meaning. Maybe you've done too much. You feel like God can't use you anymore. You can't possibly have any purpose or meaning. But the good news is, on the basis of nothing that you've done, just on the basis of the fact that you're human and you're living and you're breathing, God has purpose for you. And this purpose is to reflect the image of God, to bear the image of God. Now, I want to explain this a little bit more because I think this is really important. If God is all into image and the image is his image and the way that we reflect that image in our lives, then I think we need to spend some time understanding how do we actually do that? How do we actually reflect and bear the image of God in our lives? And a really simple point to help you understand this, a little illustration. To say that you are born, you are created to have the purpose of reflecting God is basically to say you were born to be a mirror. You're born to be a mirror. Now, as you can see, some of you are getting attacked in the eyes by my light right now from the mirror. Mirrors are really good at reflecting things. That's what they're made to do. In fact, I was kind of thinking about this the other day. I'll point it this way so you don't get your eyes messed up. I was thinking about this the other day. What does a mirror actually look like? I mean, has anyone actually ever seen a mirror itself, right? All you ever see is a reflection in the mirror. Anyone have any good answers on this one? I don't know. Maybe scientists out there. What does a mirror look like? A good mirror, you don't see the mirror itself. You see your reflection, or you see whatever's being reflected in it. In the same way, we are meant to be mirrors reflecting the image of God out into the world. We were made to be angled mirrors facing him and reflecting it out to all the creation and people around us. Now, the problem is, although we were intended and created for that purpose, we were created with a specific, huge, God-ordained purpose and meaning for our lives, to reflect him perfectly to the world. And as you know, a good mirror is a mirror that reflects you as accurately as possible, right? You don't buy carnival mirrors to put in your house. That would be dumb. It would be ridiculous. You buy mirrors that reflect you as accurately as possible. We are meant to perfectly, accurately reflect who God is to the world around us. But as you know, and as I know, my life doesn't perfectly reflect God. Your life doesn't perfectly reflect God. The people around you, their lives don't perfectly reflect God. So we're faced with a problem because we are created for a very specific purpose, and yet we fail at this very specific purpose that God has given us. And we fail because of this thing called sin. You see, soon after God created Adam and Eve, he created the first humans. He gave them his image to bear and to reflect. They were tempted and they chose to disobey God. You know, bearing the image of God, reflecting him basically means you're going to obey him and you're going to worship him above everything else. They chose to disobey him in order that they might become like God. And when they chose to do that, when they chose to sin, when they chose to miss the mark of reflecting God perfectly the way they were created to do, sin entered into the entire world and into the entire human race. So that means on the basis of being human now, not only are we created for a specific purpose to reflect God's image, but we are also created and born into a sin nature, which means we have hearts that fundamentally cannot reflect God perfectly the way we're meant to. To help you understand the way sin works, if this is what we're created to be like, Sin basically comes in and does this. And for those of you concerned about me having bad luck now, I did this before the Clemson game yesterday, and they still won. So we're good. We're good. Sin shatters our ability, our foundational human capacity to reflect God the way that we're supposed to. And so now you'll see, we could still reflect. Humans, we still have the ability to reflect aspects of God, but it's not the perfect image that we're supposed to be able to reflect. This explains why some of the best people I've ever met are people who don't know Jesus. It's because all humans are created in the image of God to reflect him. People who don't know Jesus, some of the nicest, kindest people, most giving people I know, don't know Jesus, but they can bear reflections of who God is imperfectly because of how they're created. All of us are born into a world with hearts that look like this, with lives that look like this, that shatter, that put out shattered, broken images of what God is like. Now, we basically have three options with what we want to do with our lives here. I'll put this down so once again, you're not blinded. We basically have three options. What are we going to do with this? Now, the most popular option in our culture today is just to act like it's not broken. We're just gonna say, this is exactly how it's supposed to be. You were born like this, therefore, how could you possibly question that it's different than how it's supposed to be? In our culture of moral relativism, we just wanna say, who are you to impose on me the way that I am supposed to be living, or the way my life is supposed to look, or what my purpose is supposed to be? That's one option. The other option, and I think this is probably one of our favorites in the church world, is that we just try to hide it. We recognize that we're broken, but instead of trying to do something with it, we'll just kind of turn it around. We'll try to cover it up, right? So if culture is about moral relativism, then sometimes in the church, we can be about hypocrisy. And what we do is we just try to cover it up and act like we don't really have any of these big issues. We don't really need a lot of help. Our lives are okay. We need a little bit of Jesus on Sunday mornings, maybe a life group to make us feel like we're doing the right things, quiet time every so often, check the boxes, we're good, we'll cover it up. That's another option. Another option, I think we're pretty good at this at the church as well, but this is culture in general, is we'll try to fix it ourselves. We'll say, okay, it's broken, but I can do this. Americans especially, we're like, I can do this, I can pick this up, and we start picking up the little pieces and trying to figure out where they go, and it's impossible. It's impossible. And this is what religion ultimately does. Every religion in the world is about, how can I clean up, how can I fix the brokenness inside of me? How can I fix myself, this brokenness, so I can reach heaven or nirvana or zen or perfection or whatever it is? And hopefully, as you can see in this illustration, if you got a broken mirror like this, that's not gonna work unless you got a whole lot of super glue and hours upon hours upon hours. Even then, it's not gonna be the same. It's never gonna be the same. In our lives, in our hearts, we have pride. We have selfishness. We have anger issues. We have self-worth issues. We have so many different things that we do. So many different areas of brokenness. And many of us, we just want to say, I got this. I'll do it myself. The reality is that none of these options work. And you see, this is a problem, because if you're created for a specific purpose, to reflect perfectly the image of God, but by nature you can't do it, that's not good. That means that every time that we are walking around, or anything that we do, we are reflecting a partially true but mostly untrue picture of what God is like. In other words, with our lives, in our state of brokenness because of sin, we tell lies about what God is like because we are created to bear and reflect his image. I don't know about you, but that's a big deal, to tell lies about what God is like. Now, if you had a mirror like this in your house, my guess is it wouldn't last in your house very long. It'd be out in the trash. Maybe you're like me, we have piles of trash from Christmas. Lots of stuff, old stuff we're giving away, that stuff. This isn't in the giveaway pile. This is in the trash pile. And if we're really honest, the hard truth is that God would have every right in our sin, in our rebellion, in our brokenness. God would have had every right to just be done with us. But the good news is, he doesn't leave us in our brokenness. Because at the right time, God sent his son. He sent himself, the second person of the Trinity, in the man Jesus Christ, to be born and to reflect perfectly the image of God. I mean, think about how the New Testament talks about him, and maybe this will start to click a little bit now about what's happening. Think about what he says, Colossians 1:15. He is the image of the invisible God. 2 Corinthians 4:4, the glory of Christ, who is the image of God. Hebrews 1:3, he is the radiance of the glory of God and the exact imprint of his nature. Other places, Paul calls him the second Adam. Because where the first Adam came, the first humans came, and they were meant to reflect God's image, but they failed. Jesus came and is the second Adam, but he was perfect. He wasn't born into sin. He was the mirror who perfectly reflected the image of God. And the good news is, he did it on our behalf. Because we couldn't do it. Because in our brokenness of trying to fix ourselves and put the pieces back together, we can't do it. God said, I'm not leaving them there. I'm going to take the initiative, and I'm going to step in and do it for them. And so Jesus comes, and he lives a life that perfectly reflects the image of God. You see, it's not just the fact that Jesus came and he reveals what God is like. That is extremely important, and we celebrate that a lot of times at Christmas. But I think the flip side of that is, by coming and showing us what God is like, Jesus shows us what it means to be human. What does it actually mean to be human? What does it actually mean to live a life that is full and satisfying? What does it actually mean to have purpose, to live a life that is meaningful? Jesus shows us that by perfectly reflecting God. And then he makes a way for us to do it. Because he not only was born, and this is what we celebrate at Christmas time, right? He came, but it didn't end there. He lived a perfect life, and then he was sentenced to die because of our sin. And when he died, somehow, he took on all of the punishment, all of the brokenness, all of the fragility, all of this, all of the shattered, torn pieces of our lives and our world, he took on in his own flesh. He died. He bore the weight of it all. And then on the third day, this is where Easter comes in, he was resurrected. He was resurrected to life. And it was God's way of saying, everyone in the religious institution, even Jesus' followers thought at the end of the day, I guess this wasn't really the guy we were looking for. I guess Jesus wasn't really the guy that we were looking for. He died. But when God raised him back to life, it was God's way of saying, no, he is the one. He is my son. He is the one. He is the one who shows you what it means to live a true human life that's satisfying, that's meaningful, that lives up to the purpose that you're created for. I was talking to Scott Carpenter, who's on staff, the other day, and we were talking about this message, among other things, in Christmas. And he told me that a couple years ago, he had this realization. He said he was packing up his Christmas decorations, and he was packing up a nativity scene, and he had it, set up so it would fit perfectly in the box. And it got to the final piece, which was the baby Jesus. And he said he just had this moment of clarity where he realized, how many of us pack up Jesus with the rest of our Christmas decorations once Christmas is over? Like, we have this special time of celebrating him, of thinking about him, of trying to put him in the focus of our lives. But how many of us pack him up with the rest of our Christmas decorations? How many of us, for those of you who maybe have grown up in the church or been around it, how many of us have said a prayer for salvation and gotten our get out of hell free card, but then just kind of left Jesus behind in the rearview mirror because we felt like we're good and we don't need him anymore? The reality is that the only way to fulfill our purpose, to bear and reflect the image of God the way we were meant to, is to turn to him in faith and to constantly be looking at him. To constantly be looking at him. I was on an 8th grade trip. My 8th grade year, we went to Washington, D.C. And of course, being an 8th grade boy, I was all concerned about how I looked and the things that I had that were cool at that time. And at that time, Oakley sunglasses were really cool. And so if I wanted to be cool, I had to get Oakley sunglasses. Obviously, it makes a lot of sense. And so we go to D.C., and if you've been to D.C. or any big city, there's lots of guys on the streets just selling stuff. And a guy comes up, and he kind of opens his jacket, and he starts pulling out these Oakley sunglasses, right? And I'm in 8th grade, so I'm like, these might be real. These might be real. How much are they? $10. This is the best deal of my lifetime. I've got to buy these $200 sunglasses for $10. Obviously, they were not real sunglasses. They were counterfeits. But I bought them, and for a while, I felt good because they looked good, and unless you looked really closely and knew what to look for, you thought I had real Oakley sunglasses. There were times where I thought I had real Oakley sunglasses. Until eventually, I realized these lenses are just dark. They're not polarized at all. The sun is burning my eyeballs. And then the paint starts wearing off, and then the O literally peels off of the sunglasses. And I realized that might have worked for a couple of weeks, but at the end of the day, it didn't satisfy what I wanted in Oakley sunglasses. I settled for a counterfeit because I wasn't willing to pay the price of the real thing. How many of us in our lives, and especially now as we begin a new year, how many of us are settling for counterfeit satisfactions, counterfeit ways of living the human life because we're unwilling to pay the price for the real thing? You see, the message that Jesus gives is come and follow me. And it's so simple. It's such a simple image. I mean, really, if we're talking about what it means to bear and reflect the image of God, all it means is to constantly keep your gaze on him, right? How does a mirror reflect your image? You look straight at it. You have to put the object right in front of the mirror in order to see it reflected. For us to be angled mirrors, to be mirrors reflecting God's image around us, we have to be constantly faced towards Jesus. And that sounds really simple, and it is, but that doesn't mean it's easy. It's costly. It's costly. It'll cost you your life potentially. Mike was reading in the call of worship out of Revelation, and Revelation is a great book to read because we often think about it in terms of the end times, but really John was much more concerned about discipleship. He was much more concerned with believers in the here and now who are suffering under all kinds of different things, and he was trying to give them a vision of what is happening in the heavens. Jesus is on the throne, and Jesus is gonna come back and be worshiped by everyone. And his goal in that is so that when we read Revelation, and we read Revelation chapter 4 and 5, like Mike was reading, we get this picture of God that is so glorious, we keep our eyes set on him no matter what's happening in our lives. What if for New Year's, what if our underlying goal and resolution was simply to set our face towards Jesus daily? to spend time in Scripture, to spend a few moments every day praying, to spend time regularly, setting an alarm on your phone at different points in each day where you can just say, I'm gonna take 10 minutes, 10 seconds, whatever, and I'm just gonna try to turn my heart, turn my gaze back to Jesus, because I know when I look at him, I'm gonna begin to reflect him out. It's the only way in this new year you will realize the meaning that God has for your life. It's the only way in this new year that you will find satisfaction in your life. And it's the only way that God has created through Jesus to be saved. I hope that as you consider these things, as we continue to worship together, and as you step into this new year, you will think about how you can be a mirror reflecting God's image. Will you pray with me? Father, in this room, there are so many different stories, so many different concerns, so many different journeys of faith, so many different hurts. God, you know all of them. And God, you know that underneath all the different things that we're searching for, the only thing that will satisfy us, the only thing that will bring us the purpose and meaning for which you created us, is for us to gaze at the face of Jesus, to worship him. God, I pray for my friends in this room right now. I pray that more than thinking through all the different things that we need to do to clean ourselves up, to fix the brokenness, to patch up our lives, to get better, God, I pray more than any of those things that in this new year, we would be a people focused on you. We would be a people focused on just setting our eyes on you. Father, I pray that for every person here this morning, Father, that there would be a realization of your love in their lives. That there would be a realization that there is a brokenness called sin, but God, that you have paid the way for healing. You've paid the way for freedom. You've paid the way for purpose and for meaning. Father, we thank you, we praise you this morning. I'm gonna encourage you now to just take a moment before we transition. Just take a moment in silence between you and God. And whatever those things are on your heart that prevent you from setting your gaze at him to reflect him, I ask you and I invite you to turn those things over to him. To make a single resolution now to set your gaze towards Jesus. And Mike will close us out in just a moment.